Hello, welcome back to the podcast. I am Audrey Rindlisbacher, author of The Mission Driven Life, and currently working on my new book, How Truth Makes Us Free. If you are liking this podcast, I would love it if you would give a review. If you would like it, pass it along. And if you have not gone and grabbed your copy of my free Truth Seeker Starter Kit over at audreyrindlisbacher.com, you probably want to do that. It's a really great brief introduction to this whole process of the nature of truth, and it walks you through the steps, the 5 steps. I did a podcast on it recently of what those 5 steps are, and you can go through that practice principle at the end and see the power of this model for yourself. So I recently released a podcast called The Lie of Self-Esteem, Why We Don't Need to Like Ourselves. And my sister was listening to it, and she gave me some feedback that was super helpful. I think very good feedback, and I'm going to spend a few minutes with you on it today. She said, in the Mission Driven Life and in all my academies, well, the Mission Driven Mom and the Mission Driven Teen Academies, we go through the 7 laws of life mission. And the first 4 laws are foundational laws. You love God, you love yourself, you love truth, and you love humanity. And those are the preparatory steps to hear the call, to execute it courageously, and to do it again, so that our life becomes a series of missions, of these events where we partner with God and we go do good works, and then we learn something, we grow, and then we do it again. And those foundational laws that build the foundation for our lives are the stepping stone. We return to them often. We strengthen ourselves in those laws. And they each kind of have a subtitle. So loving, so that you can better understand what I mean when I say love God. Loving God means to establish your divine center, to admit that there's something higher than yourself, that there's a law that you didn't create, that you have to submit to, that's part of the fabric of reality. In order for you to progress in life, you have to be in line with that, that's the source of truth. And that as you do that, you will continue to grow as an individual, and that God's right at the center of that because they're his laws, and that willingness is the step. And there's a video, I think I made it into a podcast recently about C.S. Lewis and Nietzsche, that in the Academy is called Willing versus Willful, where I delineate all of that. So the second law then of life mission is to love yourself. And the first kind of level, the first takes about, I don't know, most people take 9 to 12 months to go through it, is loving God and loving yourself. And we do a lot of really cool things in there, which I've talked about on this podcast many times. Cycle through self-care and self-governance or self-leadership or self-management, however you want to talk about it. And then we do self-discovery. And it's a really joyful experience. You take care of yourself, and then you lead yourself better. And then you discover more things about yourself. So it's a cool little cycle. You do that 4 times. And one of the very first things that we do, and in fact, I talk about this, you could learn more about it in my book, The Mission Driven Life, because I give my favorite definition of love in that podcast. And I mean, in the book, sorry, and I've talked about it in the podcast too. You can go back and find the 7 Laws series too, if you want to dig into that on the podcast. But I give my favorite definition by M. Scott Peck of what love is, that is reverberated in scripture and many other greats. And we'll spend just a few minutes today with Peck and C.S. Lewis talking about love and talking about some of the things that I introduced students to early on in the academy. I don't specifically talk about liking versus loving, but we'll do that today for just a few minutes because I think it's important to touch on. So the definition of love that is in The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck is this, and it's the definition that I put in my book, The Mission Driven Life, and that is focused on in the academy that you learn and that we talk about often, and it's this. Love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. It's really important to recognize that this definition is about growth. And one of the things that Peck says in other places, which other authors, Covey and others, have also said the same thing. And that is that mental and spiritual and emotional growth all go hand in hand. And so when Peck says spiritual growth, he really means the soul, he means the whole person. And you'll notice that this concept of the will, of being willing instead of willful, and if you didn't listen to that podcast about Nietzsche and Lewis, I will link it below. The will is the thing that is uniquely mine, that I completely control, that is a gift from God, and that I can use to choose whatever life I want to build. And it's kind of like when Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Well, that's the principle of the concept or virtue of humility as the first stepping stone to personal growth. And willingness means that you've humbled yourself, that you're not willful, that you are accepting someone else's way, in this case, God's way, to be led and guided by something other than just your own instincts and desires. And you'll also notice that we are, in this definition, it's using our will, so it's making the choice to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's personal growth. So you are choosing, making a choice, using your will, which is the source of your personal power and decision-making ability, to extend yourself. When you extend yourself, you do something that you wouldn't naturally do. You do something that isn't just your gut instinct or doesn't come easy for you. Usually when we think of extending ourselves, we're stretching, we're growing, we're doing something hard, we're doing something unnatural, we're doing something that requires some work. And we do it with the purpose. We make a choice using our will to do something uncomfortable or hard or put in the work. And the purpose of that work is so that we can grow or so that others can grow or both. Now, C.S. Lewis said this really beautifully in Mere Christianity when he talks about charity. He says, love does not mean an emotion. And that's precisely what Peck has just said. That love isn't that I feel a certain way. I might feel angry. I might feel resentful. I might feel frustrated. I might feel overwhelmed. I can still love because it isn't an emotion. It's the will to extend myself for someone else. It is a state, C.S. Lewis goes on, it is a state not of the feelings, but of the will. So he said the same thing. And what's ironic here is that Peck wrote this book as an atheist. He later converted to Christianity. Maybe he'd read some of Lewis, I don't know. But this isn't like, oh, all the disciples of one discipline. This is different people from different backgrounds coming at this from a different place. That state of the will, this is Lewis again, that state of the will which we have naturally about ourselves and must learn to have about other people. So he goes on to talk about what he thinks that fundamentally love is, and it is the state of doing the things for the person. So he gives an example here, which I really, really love. He says, we have to learn charity. We have to learn to love like God. We have to learn to love properly. And I say this often, but when we were building out, I had taught the content that's in the Mission Driven Mom and Teen programs for several years beforehand. I called it lifelong learning, and I'd taken a lot of people through it, and they'd had good experiences. And I wanted to fine tune it and make it even better. So for almost a year, I met with Lindsay and Tracy every week. We read things, we went over them, we talked about them, and it was just crazy. It was crazy how often our conversations came back to, well, it's all about love. If we were loving properly, if we didn't have these distorted ideas, which we do, that love is love, all that love is love means is that you have an emotion and you should give way to that emotion. And that is not what love is at all. Love is a choice, it's an action, and it's a sacrifice. And it's something that we choose to do no matter how we feel. And the feelings of love are produced by the actions of love. Just like the feelings of being more courageous or more kind or generous are generated by doing the action. This is why I say often that what I see in scripture is seems to be far more interested in what we're actually doing than what we're feeling and thinking. Those things matter, but when we do the right actions, we can change those things. And we talk about that in the academy as well. So we have to learn charity. We have to learn what love really is, and we have to learn to love properly. And I'm going to explain why. When you better understand what love really is, and when you're looking at it correctly, it's easy to understand, it's easy to see why liking isn't loving. Okay, so Lewis says the rule for all of us is perfectly simple. Do not waste time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did. And as soon as you do, and as soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. When you are behaving as if you loved someone, you will presently come to love them. And the reverse is also true. If you injure someone you dislike, you will find yourself disliking them more. This is why it's vital that we pray for our enemies and that we love those that do evil to us. How do we love them? If love is a feeling, how would we love someone that we hate? How would we love someone that misused us or abused us? We would take actions. We would use our will to generate growth for us or growth for them in some concrete way. And so he goes on to talk about how if you are struggling to feel the emotions of love for God, you can do exactly the same thing. He says, some writers use the word charity to describe not only Christian love between human beings, but also God's love for man and man's love for God. About the second of these two, people are often worried. They're told they ought to love God. They cannot find any such feeling in themselves. So if we can get clear about the fact that love is a choice and it's an action, and if we'll do the actions of love, we will be rewarded with greater feelings of love, then we can stop pretending like love is simply an emotion that we cannot control. When we say love is love, all we mean is something like physical attraction or lust. That those feelings are natural, that they just happen to us, that we can't control that. Fine, we'll give in. We'll say, fine, we can't control who we're attracted to, and we can't control the emotions that we feel. But we can control the actions that we take, which will help control the feelings that we feel. Why would Jesus, I've thought about this so many times, why would Jesus say that his yoke was easy and his burden was light? When he has the weight of the world on his shoulders, when he has redeemed all mankind, and he has just, even if you don't believe he was the savior, he's definitely an incredible leader and everybody's looking up to him and he's taking care of everybody and he's curing them and they're following him around and they're asking for all these favors. Why would he say that his yoke is easy and his burden is light? Well, it's because he has the proper perspective and he takes the proper actions all the time. And so the proper emotions follow. As he takes actions of love, and sometimes that means calling someone out. Sometimes that means establishing a boundary. Sometimes that means holding people accountable. He does all those things. He takes the proper action that love requires to bring about the growth of the other. And then he has the feelings of love that are appropriate. And so he's not burdened by the resentments and the self-pity and the anger and the hurts that we carry that make us feel so burdened and depressed. So we're told that we ought to love God. So back to Lewis. They cannot find any such feeling in themselves. What are they to do? And yes, this is so vital to understand because if we can't just conjure up emotions, what are we supposed to do? The answer is the same as before. Act as if you did. Do not sit trying to manufacture feelings. Or do not sit trying to get rid of feelings. And sometimes, look, I've been to therapy. My kids have been to therapy. I'm not an anti-therapy kind of a girl. My husband has a degree But I will say that I do feel like sometimes when we're in the therapist's office, we're there to try to fix things that can only be fixed by action. And sometimes we're there conjuring up feelings, talking through feelings incessantly. Not that that's not helpful to a point, but we can produce certain feelings that we want to feel if we will leave that office and go do the things that generate those feelings. So he says, Lewis says, ask yourself, if I were sure that I loved God, what would I do? When you have found the answer, go and do it. And then he goes on, just what I was saying before, feelings are not what God principally cares about. Love, either towards God or man or ourself, is an affair of the will. And in fact, I'll read you one more thing from Peck about this when it concerns looping back to loving and liking ourselves as we get more clear about this. He says again, love is not effortless. To the contrary, it is effortful. Will is desire of sufficient intensity that it is translated into action. And it's an action of intention and choice. So getting back to you and I loving ourselves versus liking ourselves. And this is Peck again. Indeed, as has been pointed out, we are incapable of loving another unless we love ourselves, just as we are incapable of teaching our children self-discipline unless we ourselves are self-disciplined. It is actually impossible to forsake our own spiritual development in favor of someone else's. We cannot forsake self-discipline and at the same time be disciplined in our care for another. We cannot be a source of strength unless we nurture our own strength. As we proceed in our exploration of the nature of love, I believe it will become clear that not only do self-love and love of others go hand in hand, but that ultimately they are indistinguishable. Just as when I am choosing to be self-disciplined, and that changes my character because I'm striving for virtue, and it makes me more of me. It brings me more into harmony with myself and lifts me above my natural state. It also helps me better understand the nature of discipline. I can't really understand discipline unless I'm striving for it myself and I'm taking those actions. And then I can better explain it to other people. I can better see it in other people. I can better walk other people through the experience because I've worked on it myself. How am I going to share or help another person to become more disciplined unless I better understand the nature of it myself because I've experienced it myself? I've always been a studious person. I own, thousands of books. I've always been the one to go to the source and read about it and want to get answers that way. And that's fine. That's a legitimate way of being. But if my academic pursuits are divorced from my daily behavior, then it's done me absolutely no good. I had a good friend one time when I was living out in Tyler, Texas, who told me that she wanted to better understand the nature of service and what the principles of service were and how service really works. And it was interesting because when she started that sentence, she's telling me, I want to better understand the nature of service. And so I'm thinking to myself, oh, well, if I wanted to understand service, I would get into the scriptures and I would read all these other books and I would see how other people served. And that would be helpful, but only to a point. But she was a very different kind of person. And she said, I want to understand service, so I'm going to go serve. So she was engaged in multiple different types of service projects all throughout every week, learning about service by doing and coming to love to a greater degree the people that she loved. And you can imagine the personal growth that happened inside of her as a consequence of the fact that she was taking action. She was living out true principles. She was letting the truth make her free. So what does all this have to do with liking ourselves? Now, you could make an argument perhaps that liking is the same kind of thing as loving, and that we say we love an apple or we say we like an apple, and we use those terms interchangeably, which we definitely do. But if we want to talk very clearly about what I meant in that podcast about we don't need to like ourselves, and what Fritz meant in his book that we don't need to like ourselves, and what that has to do with self-esteem, it is simply this, that love is an action and liking is a feeling. Or liking is an approval, or liking is a an approbation. That I have certain opinions about who I am, and so I think I'm really neat. I think I'm really cool. I don't have to think anything good about myself. How would a person, a murderer, say, or a lifetime addict, ever climb out of the mess that they had made, ever begin to even have a hope of liking themselves if they didn't make the choice to love themselves first? Love is a choice and it's an action. And when you get into the academies, then I hope to write a book on this in the next couple years about the difference between needs and wants. It's so vital to understand. And that's what self-care is. Self-care is not a trip to the nail spa with your girlfriend, although that can be a very fun outing. Meeting needs is about recognizing that truly loving yourself, is about recognizing truly loving yourself is about recognizing that you have needs and you're the only one that can meet them. And that if you want to feel better, if you want the feelings of liking and loving towards yourself, if you want to gain your own approbation, if you want to respect and trust yourself, you must love yourself first. That means recognizing your real needs, and that means taking action to meet your real needs. And what you will find over time is that you do approve of yourself, that you do respect yourself, and that you do trust yourself. But maybe you still don't really think that you're all that great. You definitely see your flaws, you see your weaknesses. And there's one other dynamic which I'm not even actually sure which C.S. Lewis book this is in, but it's a really important thing to add on here, and it is this. C.S. Lewis makes the point, which other authors have done as well, other great leaders, spiritual leaders especially. But it's an important principle to really internalize, and that is that the closer we come to the divine, the further away we understand ourselves to be. And the further we go away from the divine, the more we think that we're okay, or doing well, or doing better than we are. In other words, anytime we're really close to something, we see it clearly. We understand it for what it really is, and we can make comparisons that are realistic and true. But the further away we are from something, the more we tend to fudge the lines and pretend like that isn't the nature of the thing. And our comparisons become more and more inaccurate. So if I'm striving for virtue and I'm trying to draw closer to God, then the closer I get to him, the more I see the astounding difference between where I'm at and where he's at, which increases my humility, beats down my pride, and could actually make me, quote, not like myself as well, in the sense that I can see that I'm really far from where I would like to be. But ironically, as we love ourselves, we come to like ourselves more. And at least maybe not like all the things about ourselves. You know, if you're going to talk about just liking yourself, I wish I was more extroverted. I wish I could engage in small talk better. I wish that I wasn't so hard on myself and other people. I wish that I was cleaner and more organized. I mean, I could give you a whole big laundry list of traits I wish I had, of ways of being that I think that I wish that I was, things that make me not really like the way that I am in the world. But I approve of myself because I know that I'm making efforts to strive toward what is good and true and beautiful. And I respect myself for picking myself back up and trying again. All of that doesn't necessarily equal the feeling of like. Do I like myself? I don't know, I guess. I mean, I want to like myself to the degree that I have to hang out with myself every day, all day. And I'm not saying that the feelings of liking are bad or that we shouldn't strive for them, But we can't get there with self-esteem tactics. We can't get there by deciding that we're going to go on more adventures or we're going to talk more in class. The kind of criteria that this movement depends upon and the value set that it places before you, that you ought to value the 4-hour work week. You ought to value wealth and prosperity. You ought to value, whatever it is that's placed in front of you as part of this whole, and I'm going to do a podcast here soon on the whole positive thinking movement and some ways of looking at it that are kind of different that I have just had insight on that have been very helpful for me. But I hope you understand now why it is that I can say that the self-esteem movement is so unhelpful and like I said in that podcast, when you are striving to become a better person and you're asking yourself, what is a worthy ideal that I can strive for? Just like our favorite goal definition, Earl Nightingale, it's the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. So the ideal, like we talked about in the last one, is something we could talk about it as a goal that we set up, not our ideal selves, but a goal, something worthy of us, something worthy of spending our life on, and that we're going to strive for that. That's success, is progressively realizing that, working towards something that matters, that's worthy of our time and effort. And we can set that for ourselves, and we can strive toward it without stopping to ask ourselves if we think we're worthy of it, if we think we've earned it, if we think we're good enough for it, if we think we can do it, if we like ourselves enough for it to happen, if other people like us enough. That all of that self-evaluation garbage is just not even worth your time in that sense. Now, doing self-discovery stuff and finding out that you're really smart in this way and that way, and that you're really intuitive or you're really empathic, that helps you, yes, to accept yourself more and like yourself better. But in terms of taking actions that, in terms of actually liking yourself, it doesn't matter because you can still love yourself. And loving yourself by meeting your needs will help you approve of your efforts. It will help you respect and trust yourself better. And that will aid you in taking greater and greater risks. But at the end of the day, you can just decide what it is that's worthy of building in your life and then go build it, go create it. It doesn't matter if you have self-esteem or not, because you're busy loving yourself and others. And you're so busy doing that and having that love generate feelings of love and acceptance and approval that you're not worried about whether or not you liked yourself, whether or not you thought you could do it, and whether or not you had a high self-esteem. So hopefully that clears up some questions that might have come to your mind in listening to that podcast and gives you a better insight and window into what it means to truly love. I talk more about this in the Mission Driven Life book. And of course, we dive deep into it in the Mission Driven Mom and Mission Driven Teen Academies. So I would encourage you to go there and get started on that journey if you haven't. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time.